Jacob never expected to walk into a nightmare, but that summer afternoon changed everything. He saw his father, the man he had always admired, and his mother, the woman he trusted most, in a shocking act with a stranger, an encounter that would unravel their family and expose secrets too dark to ignore. Jacob had always believed his home was a place of safety, a place where secrets were few and trust ran deep. His father had been a figure of authority, a man of discipline and apparent integrity. His mother, distant yet nurturing in her own way, had maintained the household with precision. Jacob admired both of them in different ways, never imagining that the life he knew could harbor shadows so dark and twisted. But that summer afternoon changed everything. It was hotter than usual, the kind of heat that made the air inside the house heavy and suffocating. Jacob had been at a friend's house earlier that day, laughing and playing video games, forgetting the weight of schoolwork and responsibilities. On his way home, he had thought about grabbing a cold drink from the fridge and retreating to his room to cool off. He expected the house to be quiet, maybe with the faint hum of the air conditioner or the occasional sound of his mother moving in the kitchen. But as he opened the front door, he sensed something was off. The air smelled different, a mixture of unfamiliar perfume and the faint musk of sweat, sharp and invasive. It made him pause. His steps were careful as he walked down the hallway, every creak of the floorboards echoing in his ears. Curiosity, mixed with a strange sense of foreboding, led him toward the bedroom. He had no intention of witnessing anything unusual, yet some invisible force seemed to pull him closer. He approached the partially open door, peeking through just enough to see inside. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. His father, the man he had always respected, was not alone. His mother was there too, in a situation that was completely foreign to Jacob's understanding. Another person, someone Jacob had only seen briefly in the neighborhood, was present as well. The scene was intimate, chaotic, and overwhelming, a sharp betrayal of everything Jacob had believed about his parents. His mind raced. Every image seemed to clash violently with the memory of his family's ordinary life. He wanted to look away, to convince himself that he had imagined it, but his eyes refused to obey. It was real, and the truth hit like a physical blow. Jacob's stomach churned, a mix of disgust, shock, and confusion. The world he had known, his safe, predictable family life, suddenly felt like a fragile illusion, easily shattered by the dark undercurrents he had never suspected. He stepped back, barely able to breathe. His father moved slightly as if sensing a presence, and Jacob froze, heart pounding in his chest. The fear of being caught intensified everything, a rush of adrenaline and dread coursing through him. He slowly retreated, every step careful and silent, trying to process the unimaginable scene he had just witnessed. The air in the house seemed heavier now, as if charged with secrets that had been hiding in plain sight. Jacob wanted to scream, to confront, to demand answers, but a paralyzing fear held him back. In the following moments, Jacob's mind replayed every interaction with his parents over the past months. He remembered their arguments, subtle glances, and unexplained absences. Nothing had made sense until now, but each memory now fit into a disturbing pattern. The realization was suffocating. His father, the man who had seemed so dependable, had led a double life, one hidden behind smiles, casual conversation, and normalcy. His mother, too, was complicit in a secret world Jacob had never imagined existed. The betrayal was not just personal, it was cosmic, shaking the foundation of everything Jacob had believed. After what felt like hours, though it had been only minutes, Jacob left the house, stepping into the hot, stifling air outside. He did not speak to anyone, did not call a friend, did not even think of seeking comfort. The weight of what he had seen pressed down on him, making each step toward the street feel like wading through thick mud. He wandered aimlessly, the neighborhood now looking foreign and menacing. Houses that had once seemed welcoming were now shadowed, every window a potential doorway to secrets and lies. The sense of security that had always defined his home life was gone, replaced by annoying anxiety he could not shake. Back at home, the house itself seemed different. The walls, once familiar, now felt like barriers hiding dark truths. Jacob noticed small details he had ignored before, the way his parents' laughter sometimes seemed forced, the subtle tension in their movements, the way his father's eyes darted when he thought no one was watching. Each observation became a piece of a puzzle he did not want to solve but could not ignore. The ordinary became sinister, and every corner of his life was now tinged with suspicion. Sleep that night was impossible. Jacob lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over, each time noticing more details, each time feeling a deeper sense of betrayal. He questioned everything: his father's advice, his mother's kindness, the lessons he had been taught. Could anyone be trusted? Was everything he had believed a carefully constructed lie? The questions consumed him, twisting his thoughts into knots of anger, fear, and disbelief. Days passed, and the image of that afternoon refused to fade. Jacob began noticing patterns he had previously ignored: late-night whispers, closed doors, hurried phone calls. He realized the scene he had witnessed was only the tip of a hidden world, one built on deception and secrecy. The revelation left him trapped between two realities: the life he had known and the darkness he had uncovered. Trust, once absolute, became fragile enough to shatter at the slightest touch. Jacob's perspective of his parents had changed irreversibly. The admiration he once felt was replaced with suspicion, his innocence eroded by the knowledge of their hidden desires. He understood that the family he loved could also be the source of profound betrayal, and that the house, which had always been a sanctuary, could conceal unimaginable acts. From that moment, Jacob's world was divided into before and after, a line drawn sharply by the events of that one scorching afternoon. The lessons were brutal: appearances could deceive, trust could be betrayed in the blink of an eye, and the people we hold closest could harbor secrets too dangerous to confront. In the aftermath, Jacob began to prepare himself for what would come. He knew life inside the house would never be the same, that each interaction would carry the weight of suspicion and fear. The incident had opened a door, one that could never be closed, and the consequences of stepping through it would shape his family forever. Jacob understood that the fragile illusion of normalcy was shattered, replaced by a tense, watchful existence where every glance, every movement, and every word could carry hidden meaning. The events of that day would haunt Jacob, not in nightmares but in waking hours, a constant reminder of the fragility of trust and the complexity of human desire. He had glimpsed a reality he was never meant to see, a world where betrayal and lust intertwined with everyday life. And while the house around him remained the same on the surface, Jacob knew that underneath the foundation had cracked irreparably, leaving him suspended between fear, knowledge, and the inevitable reckoning that awaited. The days after that summer afternoon became a waking nightmare for Jacob. Every moment at home was thick with unease, a suffocating tension that seemed to seep into the walls themselves. The house, which had once been a place of comfort and security, now felt like a prison where every sound, every shadow, carried hidden threats. Jacob could not escape the memory of what he had seen. It replayed endlessly in his mind like a video stuck on loop, each replay bringing sharper clarity and deeper dread. He began noticing details that he had never considered before. The way his father's footsteps sounded different when approaching the bedroom, the subtle changes in his mother's expressions, the quiet sighs that came from rooms down the hall. Jacob's father, once a figure of authority and protection, now seemed like a stranger. The man who had taught him to ride a bike, helped with homework, and offered guidance on life's smallest and largest challenges was now someone whose private life carried secrets that Jacob could barely comprehend. The father he had trusted completely had been living a double life, orchestrating encounters that Jacob was never meant to see. It was not just a betrayal of marriage. It was a betrayal of everything Jacob had believed about family, trust, and morality. Every memory of fatherly advice and guidance was tainted now, each one potentially hiding manipulation or deceit. His mother's behavior also began to shift. She seemed aware somehow that Jacob had witnessed the event. Her smiles were forced, her movements cautious, as if every action was calculated to avoid detection. The warmth she had once shown occasionally now carried suspicion and subtle tension. Jacob began noticing her checking doors and windows, glancing at the clock more often than necessary, and answering phone calls in another room. The home that had once been predictable now felt like a battlefield of secrets, each member hiding pieces of truth that threatened to explode at any moment. Jacob started documenting everything he observed. He carried a small notebook with him everywhere, jotting down times, locations, and actions. He recorded when his father left the house and returned, when his mother made calls, and when they both acted unusually. The more he wrote, the more he realized the scope of the deception. It was not limited to that one shocking afternoon. It was a carefully orchestrated pattern of lies, hidden meetings, and secretive behaviors. Jacob felt a growing sense of isolation. No friend could understand the world he had uncovered. No adult could be trusted to provide guidance without potentially taking sides. He was alone in a home that was no longer safe, surrounded by walls that concealed more than they revealed. Every interaction became a test of perception and awareness. Jacob noticed how his father's eyes would dart toward the corners of the room, how his mother would suddenly pause mid-motion as if listening for invisible threats. Their carefully maintained normalcy was thin, fraying at the edges, and Jacob felt both fear and fascination in equal measure. He realized that the people he had loved and trusted could hide entire worlds of secret behavior. The knowledge was intoxicating, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. Jacob understood, instinctively, that ignorance was no longer an option. To remain passive was to risk being consumed by the deceit, trapped in a household where truth and lies were indistinguishable. Jacob began to notice changes in the neighborhood as well. He recognized faces that had seemed friendly before but now appeared suspicious in a new light. He wondered how many others were living double lives, hiding desires and breaking rules while presenting a facade of normalcy. The thought gnawed at him. What if his father's deception was part of a larger network, a hidden web of encounters stretching beyond the household? Each encounter his father had orchestrated could connect to others, and each secret could unravel into dangerous consequences if discovered. The weight of this realization pressed heavily on Jacob's young shoulders, leaving him constantly alert, constantly wary. The anxiety began to affect Jacob physically. He found it difficult to eat, his stomach tied in knots whenever his parents were near. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floor, every sudden noise in the house, became a trigger for fear. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder, almost accusatory. He imagined his father discovering that he had witnessed the event, imagining the confrontation and the inevitable anger that would follow. The home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap where one wrong step could unleash chaos. Jacob's internal struggle intensified. He felt an overwhelming urge to confront his father, to demand answers, but the fear of what might happen held him back. The father he had idolized might react violently or, worse, manipulate Jacob's knowledge for his own ends. Every plan he considered was weighed against potential consequences, and each outcome seemed worse than the last. Meanwhile, his mother's quiet, controlled panic only added to his sense of uncertainty. She was complicit, yet her actions suggested fear, guilt, and a desperate attempt to maintain control. Jacob realized that the family he had believed in was now a complex web of manipulation, betrayal, and hidden agendas. As days turned into a week, Jacob found himself more vigilant. He began monitoring the house, noting patterns in his father's movements and the timing of his mother's calls. Each detail added to the growing picture of deception. The father he had once trusted completely was now a man who could no longer be seen at face value, whose intentions were hidden beneath a polished exterior. Jacob understood that he was witnessing a dangerous cycle, one that had likely been ongoing for months or even years. The realization that he had been blind to the signs filled him with both anger and sorrow. Despite the fear and tension, Jacob also felt a strange sense of empowerment. By observing and documenting, he began to reclaim some control over the chaotic world around him. He was no longer a passive witness. He was becoming an active investigator, tracking secrets, patterns, and lies. Yet even this small sense of agency came with danger. The deeper he delved, the more he risked exposure, and the more he understood how volatile the situation could become. One misstep could unleash anger, confrontation, or even violence. The home was no longer safe, but Jacob's determination grew stronger. Each night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Jacob's mind replayed every moment he had seen, every secret he had uncovered. He questioned everything he had known about morality, trust, and family bonds. How could people he loved act so differently behind closed doors? How could someone so familiar become so alien in an instant? The answers eluded him, but the questions remained, gnawing at him, refusing to be silenced. By the end of the week, Jacob had developed a careful routine. He moved quietly through the house, observed patterns without being noticed, and documented anomalies meticulously. The initial shock had faded slightly, replaced by a tense vigilance and a sense of duty to uncover the full truth. He knew that the events of that summer afternoon were only the beginning, and that the family he had once trusted could no longer be taken at face value. A storm was brewing in the house, and Jacob was caught in the center, balancing fear, curiosity, and the urgent need to understand the dangerous world around him. Jacob had thought he had seen the worst, but as the days turned into weeks, he discovered that the truth was far more disturbing than he had imagined. His father's secret life was not a single, isolated incident. It was part of a larger, carefully concealed pattern, a series of actions designed to hide the depths of betrayal and deception from everyone around him. Jacob had begun keeping careful records, noting times, places, and behaviors, but nothing could prepare him for the discovery he would make one evening while searching through his father's study. The study had always been a room that held a strange aura of authority. Shelves lined with books, certificates, and photographs gave the impression of a man devoted to his career and family. Jacob had avoided the room in the past, respecting the privacy of his father. But now, curiosity had transformed into a need to understand, to uncover the layers of lies that had shattered his world. As he opened drawers and sifted through papers, he stumbled upon a small, locked box. The lock was flimsy, something that a young man determined to uncover secrets could bypass. With trembling hands, Jacob pried it open and was immediately confronted with evidence that made his head spin. Inside were photographs, carefully organized and labeled, capturing moments that were meant to remain private. There were pictures of his mother and father in compromising positions, images of other people Jacob recognized from the neighborhood, and even shots that suggested encounters and locations outside their home. The images were explicit, capturing scenes that left no room for misinterpretation. Jacob's stomach twisted as he flipped through them, realizing the magnitude of his father's deceit. Each photograph told a story of lust, manipulation, and betrayal. The man he had respected and trusted had been living a double life, and the evidence now lay bare before him. Jacob's mind raced. These photographs were more than just proof of infidelity. They were a record of calculated behavior. The encounters were deliberate, orchestrated with precision, and designed to ensure secrecy. His father had created a hidden world, a realm of desire and manipulation that extended beyond the family home. Jacob realized that the threesomes he had witnessed were only a fragment of a much larger pattern, a network of encounters that no one had suspected. The magnitude of the betrayal was overwhelming. It was not only a personal violation but also a social one, involving people who were supposed to be trusted friends, neighbors, and acquaintances. Fear crept into Jacob's thoughts. He wondered what his father might do if he discovered that Jacob had seen the photographs. The man he had once revered could become dangerous, protective of the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. Jacob felt a rush of anxiety, knowing that the knowledge he now possessed placed him in a precarious position. Every step he took from that moment forward would be a careful balancing act, moving between observation, discretion, and the desperate need to understand the full extent of the deception. Jacob began piecing together patterns from the photographs. There were consistent locations, familiar faces, and repeated encounters that suggested the threesomes were not random acts of passion but part of an ongoing cycle. The realization that his father had orchestrated these encounters methodically made Jacob's stomach churn. It was not impulsive. It was strategic. Jacob understood that he was dealing with a man who had carefully constructed a secret world while maintaining a facade of normalcy. Every smile, every word of advice, every act of fatherly care had been part of a complex deception. As Jacob studied the photographs, he noticed a detail that sent a shiver down his spine. In some images, there were hints of locations that could implicate his father legally. Certain meetings had occurred in spaces where consent could be questioned, and others suggested a recklessness that could have dangerous consequences. The reality of what his father had done extended beyond betrayal. It was potentially criminal. Jacob's fear deepened. The secrets he had uncovered were not only morally disturbing but also dangerous. One wrong move, one exposure, could unleash a storm of consequences that would affect not just the family but many others in their circle. Jacob realized he needed to understand more before taking any action. He began discreetly following his father, noting his comings and goings, and the people he met. He discovered that the encounters were not confined to the home. Hotels, secluded locations, and private gatherings were all part of the hidden world his father had created. Jacob recorded dates, times, and faces, building a mental map of the elaborate web of betrayal. The deeper he delved, the more he realized the complexity of his father's actions. The man he had trusted completely was not just unfaithful. He was a master manipulator, orchestrating events with careful attention to detail, leaving trails of deception in his wake. Despite the fear, Jacob could not stop. The need to uncover the full truth had become an obsession. He knew the longer he waited, the more opportunities there were for his father to cover tracks, erase evidence, and manipulate those around him. Jacob's world had shifted. The house that had once been a sanctuary was now a labyrinth of secrets, every corner hiding potential discoveries, every shadow holding hidden dangers. He moved carefully, aware that he was no longer just a witness but an active participant in a dangerous game of observation and understanding. One night, Jacob discovered another layer of deception. Hidden among the photographs was a journal, detailing encounters, dates, and even personal reflections from his father. The entries were meticulous, revealing the extent to which his father had manipulated everyone involved, including his own wife. The journal suggested that the threesomes were not mere accidents of passion but calculated acts, designed to satisfy desire while maintaining control over the narrative. Jacob's sense of betrayal deepened. The realization that his father had carefully documented everything, almost as if proud of his hidden conquests, left Jacob shaking. Jacob understood that exposure was inevitable, whether by accident or by choice. The secrets he had uncovered were too vast to remain hidden forever, and the potential for devastation was enormous. He faced a terrifying truth. The people he had trusted most could destroy everything with their actions, and the knowledge he now held placed him at the center of a delicate and dangerous balance. Every step forward required caution, every observation demanded attention, and every decision carried weight. The line between curiosity and danger had blurred, leaving Jacob navigating a world where trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. By the end of this chapter of his life, Jacob realized that the summer afternoon he had witnessed was only the beginning. The photograph's journal and observations painted a picture of deception and manipulation that extended far beyond his imagination. The father he had once idolized had become a stranger, a man capable of creating a hidden world filled with betrayal and lust. Jacob was left to reconcile the man he knew with the man he had uncovered, understanding that the journey ahead would be dangerous, unpredictable, and filled with moral and emotional challenges that could change the course of his life forever. Jacob had grown accustomed to moving silently through the house, observing and recording every movement, every subtle shift in behavior. What had started as shock and confusion had now transformed into careful vigilance, a state of constant alertness that left him exhausted but unable to stop. The evidence he had discovered, the photographs, the journal, the patterns of deceit painted a picture of a man who was no longer the father he had once known. His father had become a master manipulator, carefully orchestrating encounters while maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Jacob knew that he was witnessing something dangerous, something that could spiral out of control at any moment. He began to follow his father discreetly, leaving the safety of the home for the first time in this new, tense reality. Jacob noted the times his father left, the destinations he visited, and the people he met. Hotels, isolated apartments, and private rooms became the settings for encounters that Jacob documented with meticulous care. The patterns he observed suggested that the threesomes were not just acts of passion but part of a carefully maintained cycle designed to fulfill desire while maintaining control over appearances. Each meeting added another layer of deception, and Jacob realized that the hidden world his father had built extended far beyond the walls of their home. Fear gnawed at him constantly. Every observation carried the risk of discovery. His father, if aware of Jacob's surveillance, could react with violence or manipulation. Jacob understood that he was treading dangerous ground, that his presence in this investigation could be detected at any moment. But curiosity and the need to understand drove him onward. He had glimpsed a reality too complex and too perilous to ignore. The knowledge he now held was not just about betrayal, it was about control, manipulation, and the careful orchestration of events to maintain a facade. Jacob discovered that his father had become reckless. Certain encounters were now happening in more public locations, places where others could inadvertently witness events that were supposed to remain secret. This recklessness both alarmed and fascinated Jacob. The careful control he had observed in the past seemed to be slipping, creating opportunities for exposure. Jacob realized that the situation was escalating, that the risk of discovery and the potential consequences was growing exponentially. Each new observation became a mix of fear, tension, and grim fascination, as he pieced together the dangerous trajectory of his father's secret life. The more Jacob observed, the more he understood the psychological control his father exerted over everyone involved. The participants, including his mother, were manipulated into secrecy, bound by fear, desire, and dependency. Jacob saw how his father's charisma carefully maintained authority, and subtle coercion created a web from which few could escape. The reality was chilling. The people he had trusted, the people he had known, were part of a cycle of manipulation that was almost impossible to break. Jacob's understanding of human behavior deepened, but so did his anxiety. He realized that confronting this system would not be simple. One wrong action could lead to violence, exposure, or even irreparable damage. One night, Jacob followed his father to a hotel on the edge of town, a place he had never noticed before. The building was small, almost nondescript, but Jacob sensed that it held secrets he was not meant to uncover. He watched from a distance, noting the arrivals and departures, the faces that appeared, and the subtle signs of tension among those inside. Every observation added to the growing evidence of a hidden world, one that had been carefully constructed to maintain secrecy while indulging desire. Jacob realized that the threesomes he had witnessed at home were only part of a larger pattern, a complex network of encounters extending beyond what he had imagined. Jacob also began noticing cracks in his father's carefully maintained facade. Subtle signs of stress, moments of hesitation, and minor mistakes suggested that his father's control was not absolute. These cracks were opportunities for Jacob, evidence that the system of secrecy could be disrupted. Yet, even with this knowledge, fear remained a constant companion. The stakes were high, the potential for discovery enormous, and the consequences unpredictable. Jacob's vigilance became obsessive. He monitored every detail, every change, every anomaly, knowing that one small clue could unravel the hidden world his father had built. As Jacob pieced together more evidence, he realized the moral complexity of the situation. His father's actions were not just betrayal or desire. They were manipulation, control, and the exertion of power over others. The threesomes, once shocking simply for their sexual nature, now revealed a deeper, darker strategy. Jacob understood that exposure could have devastating consequences, not only for his father, but for everyone involved, including his mother and others who had been drawn into the web. The moral stakes were high, and Jacob felt the weight of knowledge pressing down on him with every observation. Despite the fear and anxiety, Jacob felt a growing sense of clarity. He was no longer merely a witness. He was an observer, a chronicler, and a strategist. He understood the patterns, the cycles, and the weaknesses in his father's system. He realized that the hidden world was vulnerable, that secrecy could be broken, and that truth, once revealed, would have enormous consequences. Each observation became a calculated act, each note and mental record a piece of a puzzle that, when complete, could expose everything. Jacob also noticed the effect of the secrecy on his mother. Her behavior had changed subtly but significantly. She seemed more withdrawn, cautious, and tense. Her smiles were less genuine, her movements more deliberate. Jacob realized that the burden of secrecy weighed heavily on her, that the hidden world his father had created affected everyone around him. The emotional strain was palpable, and Jacob began to understand that the consequences of exposure would ripple far beyond the immediate household. The family's stability, their social standing, and even their safety were at risk. By the end of these observations, Jacob understood that he was standing on the edge of a dangerous precipice. The summer afternoon he had witnessed was only the beginning. The photographs, journal entries, and observed encounters painted a picture of deception, manipulation, and recklessness that extended far beyond what he had initially imagined. Jacob knew that the path ahead would be fraught with risk, that every step required careful calculation, and that the consequences of exposure could change the lives of everyone involved. The house that had once been a sanctuary was now a place of constant tension and hidden danger. Jacob had seen the world behind the facade, and it was darker, more complex, and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The hidden cycles of desire, manipulation, and secrecy were unraveling before him, and the knowledge weighed heavily on his mind. He understood that the final reckoning was approaching, that the exposure of these secrets would be inevitable, and that the consequences would be profound, irreversible, and far-reaching. Jacob had been living in a state of quiet vigilance for weeks, carefully observing, recording, and analyzing every movement and detail of his father's secret life. The weight of knowledge pressed heavily on him, but he understood that he could not remain passive forever. Secrets of this magnitude could not stay hidden, and the longer they were buried, the more dangerous they became. The time for exposure, for confronting the truth, was approaching, though Jacob had no clear idea of how the storm would unfold or what consequences it would bring. His mother, too, had reached a breaking point. She began acting differently, no longer able to maintain the fragile facade of normalcy. Her gestures were sharper, more deliberate. Her eyes carried tension and guilt that she could no longer conceal. She seemed aware that Jacob had uncovered the truth and was struggling with a mixture of fear, shame, and a desire to regain some control over the chaotic situation. For the first time, Jacob noticed that she was silently trying to protect herself, her husband, and even her son caught in a web that none of them could untangle easily. One evening, the tension reached a peak. Jacob's father returned home later than usual, his steps heavy and deliberate. Jacob had followed him discreetly earlier in the day and knew that his father had been reckless, meeting people in locations that left traces, risking exposure with each encounter. But that night, the reckoning began in a way Jacob had not anticipated. His mother confronted him in private, revealing truths that went beyond what Jacob had observed. The threesomes were part of a deeper obsession, a cycle that had involved not only lust but manipulation, coercion, and control. She explained, without words but through actions and evidence, that the situation had spiraled far out of control and that the consequences could be catastrophic if the truth became public. Jacob realized that the house he had once seen as a sanctuary was now a dangerous labyrinth. Every person involved, every hidden encounter, and every carefully orchestrated meeting carried risk. The boundaries between victim and perpetrator blurred as he came to understand the psychological complexities of his father's actions. This was not merely betrayal, it was exploitation, a web of control that had ensnared his mother and others while maintaining a facade of normalcy. The weight of this realization made Jacob's heart pound and his mind race. Exposure could destroy lives, and secrecy could no longer protect them. Legal consequences became an urgent concern. Jacob began documenting every photograph, journal entry, and observed pattern in detail, realizing that the evidence he held could have serious repercussions. The threesomes, once shocking for their sexual nature, were now revealed as part of a series of deliberate actions that could attract legal scrutiny. Jacob understood that the hidden world his father had built was vulnerable, that exposure was inevitable, and that the consequences would affect not only his father, but also the entire family and social circle. Every action taken from this point forward could determine whether justice or chaos prevailed. As the days passed, the tension in the household reached a breaking point. Jacob's father became increasingly reckless, leaving traces of his secret encounters in ways that could not be fully concealed. Subtle mistakes, overlooked details, and careless patterns suggested that the carefully maintained facade was cracking. Jacob, ever vigilant, documented everything, aware that these cracks were opportunities for understanding and, if necessary, intervention. He realized that he was no longer merely observing. He had become an active participant in the unfolding drama, a keeper of dangerous knowledge with the potential to change lives forever. The climax came unexpectedly. Jacob's mother, overwhelmed by fear, guilt, and the need to act, revealed critical evidence that completed the picture of her husband's deception. Hidden financial transactions, secret communications, and additional photographs confirmed that the threesomes were part of a long-standing pattern maintained with obsessive precision. Jacob understood that exposure would not only reveal betrayal, but could also lead to legal action, social scandal, and irreparable personal damage. The consequences were far-reaching, and the weight of the truth pressed down on him like a storm about to break. The family dynamics shifted dramatically. Trust, already fractured, disintegrated completely. Jacob's father, confronted with the evidence, could no longer maintain his control. The cycle of secrecy, manipulation, and deceit began to unravel, revealing the full scope of the betrayal. Jacob's mother, though deeply affected, had taken steps to protect herself, and her son, ensuring that the truth would be documented and that the potential for further manipulation was minimized. The home, once a place of tension and hidden danger, became a site of reckoning. As secrets that had festered for months or years finally came to light, the consequences extended beyond the family. Neighbors, friends, and acquaintances who had been unknowingly involved faced the fallout. Their roles exposed by the careful documentation Jacob and his mother had gathered. The social fabric of their community was shaken, relationships were tested, and reputations were permanently altered. Jacob understood that the exposure of such hidden lives was not just about personal betrayal, it was a revelation of the dangers that secrecy, desire, and manipulation could create. Lives could be ruined, trust obliterated, and normalcy shattered in ways that could never be undone. In the aftermath, Jacob faced the most difficult challenge, reconciling the person he had known as his father with the man he had uncovered. The man he had admired, trusted, and loved was now revealed as a stranger, a person capable of deceit, manipulation, and hidden obsession. Jacob struggled with anger, sorrow, and confusion, understanding that the world he had once believed in was irrevocably altered. The house that had once represented safety now symbolized the fragility of trust and the devastating power of secrets. Jacob realized that moving forward would require strength, vigilance, and a careful understanding of the dangerous lessons he had learned. Yet despite the chaos, there was clarity. Jacob had witnessed the collapse of a carefully maintained facade, and through observation and documentation he had gained a sense of control over the unraveling situation. The truth, though painful, had been uncovered. He understood the power of knowledge, the consequences of secrecy, and the moral complexities of human behavior. The summer afternoon that had shattered his innocence had led to months of careful investigation, ultimately revealing a world of desire, manipulation, and betrayal that could no longer be hidden. As the story reached its conclusion, Jacob stood in the quiet house, reflecting on the journey he had endured. The weight of knowledge, the burden of observation, and the exposure of hidden truths had transformed him. The home that had once been a sanctuary was now a testament to the fragility of trust and the consequences of deception. Jacob understood that life would never return to what it had been, that the scars of betrayal would linger, and that the lessons he had learned would shape his understanding of human nature forever. The house, the photographs, the journal, and the evidence would remain as reminders of the storm that had passed, a haunting legacy of desire, deceit, and the ultimate reckoning that followed when secrets could no longer be contained.